The weight of the diamonds around my neck was a familiar burden, a cold, glittering yoke I had grown accustomed to wearing. Tonight, they felt heavier than ever, each facet reflecting the hollow grandeur of my life. I stared at my reflection in the immense, antique silver leaf mirror that dominated our bedroom wall. A woman I barely recognized stared back. Her name Sophia Crestwell, her expression a masterfully crafted illusion of serenity. She was dressed in a deep emerald silk gown, a color Preston had once told me matched my eyes, back when he still noticed them. Tonight was his night, of course. It was always his night. The annual Promise Gala for Youth, Philadelphia's premier charity event, was honoring him as their Philanthropist of the Year. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated tribute to his magnanimity, his vision, his meticulously maintained public persona, a persona I had spent 17 years helping him polish to a blinding sheen. I smoothed a non-existent crease in the silk, the fabric whispering against my skin. The woman in the mirror looked regal, untouchable, a queen in a gilded cage. Inside, I was a wreck of nerves, a tightly wound clock spring of anxiety that had been ticking for months. "Sophia, are you ready?" Preston's voice, smooth as aged whiskey, but laced with an undercurrent of impatience, cut through my thoughts. He appeared in the doorway of the sprawling master suite, already a monument to his own success in a custom-tailored Brioni tuxedo. He wasn't looking at me, but at the reflection of us both in the mirror, a portrait of power and prestige. He was admiring the brand, the image of the Crestwells. "The car has been waiting for 10 minutes. We can't make a late entrance. It's my night." "I'll be right there, Preston," I replied, my voice a practiced, gentle murmur. I had spent the entire day ensuring his triumph would be flawless. His suit had been laid out since noon, his speech cards reviewed and placed in a leather folio, and the personalized thank you notes for the Foundation's board of members were already signed and sealed, penned in my own elegant cursive. I was the silent architect of his public life, the invisible stagehand for the grand theater of his career. For years, this role had been enough. I had quietly shelved my own ambitions of opening a small art history consultancy to become the perfect corporate wife, believing his success was a shared victory. But the opulence of our life had begun to feel like insulation, cutting me off from a world I no longer recognized, and the silence between us had grown into a vast, echoing chasm. He moved towards the mahogany valet stand, a shrine to his daily preparations, and picked up his phone and wallet. As his thumb swiped across the illuminated screen, I saw a notification pop up. The name was Natalie. The message began, "Counting down the minutes until I see you," before he angled the phone away with a movement that was just a little too fluid, a little too conscious of my presence. A familiar, sickeningly cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach, a sensation I had been trying to ignore for what felt like an eternity. I had seen that name before. On late-night texts he'd explained away as urgent work matters from his night shift executive assistant. I had forced myself to believe him, to dismiss my own intuition as the paranoid ramblings of a lonely wife. "Was that work?" I asked, my tone painstakingly light, a performance honed by years of practice. "Just Natalie from legal, confirming the final details for the Singapore acquisition," he said, his voice a smooth, unruffled baritone. His eyes, however, wouldn't meet mine in the mirror. He was a masterful liar, but his tells were there if you knew where to look, a slight tightening around his jaw, the way he avoided a direct gaze. He slid the phone into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket. "You worry far too much, Sophia. It gives you lines. Tonight is about celebrating what we've built. Smile for the cameras. They'll be watching our every move." He crossed the room and placed a dry, perfunctory kiss on my cheek. It was a gesture devoid of warmth, a contractual obligation. He smelled of expensive cologne and ruthless ambition. As he turned and strode out of the room, I caught my own reflection one last time. The woman in the mirror's smile was a fragile, terrifying thing. The diamonds felt less like jewelry and more like armor plating. And I knew, with the certainty that settled deep in my marrow, that I was not just dressing for a party, I was preparing for a war I hadn't even officially declared.
The journey to the Crestview Plaza was made in a cavernous, funereal silence. The only sound the soft hum of the town car's engine as it sliced through the evening traffic of downtown Philadelphia. Preston was engrossed in his phone, his face illuminated by its cold blue light, while I watched the city lights smear across the rain-slicked window, feeling more like a hostage than a guest of honor's wife. When we finally arrived, the scene was one of overwhelming opulence. The hotel's grand majestic ballroom was a symphony of crystal and gold, a breathtaking cathedral of wealth. Enormous chandeliers, like diamond-dusted starbursts, dripped from the frescoed ceiling, casting a warm, buttery glow over the city's most powerful figures. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, humming with the sound of champagne-fueled laughter and the elegant strains of a string quartet. This was Preston's natural habitat, and tonight he was the apex predator. As we stepped onto the red carpet, a barrage of camera flashes exploded around us, a blinding, staccato assault on the senses. Preston's hand clamped onto the small of my back, a gesture that was less about affection and more about steering his prize asset into the spotlight. His smile was a weapon, dazzling, confident, and utterly false. I mirrored it, feeling the muscles in my own face ache with the effort. "Preston, Sophia, you both look like $1 million, boomed Mr. Wallace, a florid-faced man from the Foundation's board, rushing to greet us. "Preston, my boy, on behalf of the entire board, we can't thank you enough. Your work with Crestwell Corp is one thing, but your heart is what we're celebrating tonight. You're an inspiration to us all." "The children are the only thing that matters, Charles. It's for them," Preston replied, his voice a masterpiece of practiced humility. He navigated the room like a shark, weaving through the glittering shoals of Philadelphia's elite, accepting handshakes and backpats, soaking in the adulation like a sponge. I drifted in his wake, a silent, smiling wraith in emerald silk, murmuring my thanks, playing my part. I was the living embodiment of his stable home life, the elegant, unimpeachable proof of his respectability. My eyes, however, were on a desperate search, scanning the sea of tuxedos and couture gowns for a face I prayed I wouldn't find. And then I saw her, Natalie. She was standing near the silent auction tables, engaged in conversation with one of Preston's chief rivals. She was breathtaking in a crimson gown that seemed poured onto her body, a slash of vibrant, unapologetic color in the gilded room. She was younger, of course, at least a decade younger than me, with a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that held a look of fierce, hungry ambition, a look I faintly recognized in myself from a lifetime ago. She was laughing, a bright, confident sound, but her gaze kept flickering towards the grand entrance, scanning, waiting for him. The moment Preston's eyes met hers across the crowded room, the shift in him was undeniable. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but for me, it was as loud as a scream. His shoulders, usually ramrod straight, relaxed. The practiced, corporate smile melted away, replaced by a genuine, unguarded warmth that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He gave her a small, conspiratorial nod, a secret acknowledgement that passed between them in a heartbeat. My own heart gave a painful, sickening lurch against my ribs. The icy knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of pure dread. She's his assistant. She's on the legal team. Of course she's here. I chanted to myself, a desperate, failing mantra. But the current that passed between them was not professional. It was electric, intimate, a coded message in a language from which I was deliberately excluded. As a hostess guided us to our table, Table 1, the place of honor, directly in front of the stage, I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on us. They saw a dynasty. They saw the city's golden couple. I saw a beautifully constructed lie, and I was beginning to realize with nauseating certainty that I was the only person in the room who hadn't been let in on the joke.
The first course, a meticulously arranged tower of jumbo lump crab and avocado, sat before me like a work of abstract art, completely untouched. The conversation at our table, a painfully dull exchange between banking CEOs and their diamond-draped wives about tax shelters and summering in the Hamptons, faded into an indistinct drone. I felt a desperate, clawing need to escape, to breathe air that wasn't thick with hypocrisy. Murmuring a quiet excuse about needing to powder my nose, I slipped away from the table, my movements feeling stiff and robotic. The ladies' lounge was an oasis of marble and hushed quiet, but its cool elegance offered no comfort. As I stood before the mirror, uncapping a tube of lipstick as a pretense for my escape, two women I vaguely recognized from the philanthropic circuit entered, their voices lowered to what they must have thought was a conspiratorial whisper. "Did you see Natalie tonight?" The first one, a thin woman named Bitsy, whose face was a testament to a life of excellent dermatologists, hissed to her companion, "That red dress is an absolute siren call. She's not exactly hiding it, is she?" "Hiding it. Darling, please." The second woman, whose name I couldn't recall, scoffed as she examined her own reflection with terrifying scrutiny. "She's Preston Cresswell's real promise for youth. Everyone who's anyone knows it. He bought her that new glass-walled condo in Rittenhouse Square, for God's sake. He practically parades her around at every event. The only one who doesn't seem to know is the wife. Poor Sophia. She always looks so composed, so completely and utterly oblivious." The lipstick tube fell from my nerveless fingers, clattering against the cold marble countertop. The sharp, cracking sound echoed in the silent room like a bone snapping. Poor Sophia. Oblivious. The words weren't just insults. They were a verdict, a public declaration of my status as the city's most elegantly dressed fool. My breath hitched in my chest, a strangled, painful sound. The two women froze, their eyes meeting mine in the mirror. A look of pure, horrified panic washed over their faces before they grabbed their clutches and scurried out of the room like startled mice, their apologies tripping over each other in hushed, panicked whispers. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning bone white, my own reflection a stranger with a shattered mask. The polite composure was gone, replaced by the raw, wounded face of a woman who had just been publicly pitied. Every late night, every suspicious business trip, every time he'd flinched away from my touch, it all coalesced from a cloud of nagging doubt into a solid, undeniable truth. I splashed icy water on my face, the shock of it a welcome distraction from the inferno of humiliation raging inside me. I would not crumble. I would not give them the satisfaction of a public breakdown. I would not become the weeping wife from their gossip columns. Drawing on a reserve of iron will I hadn't accessed in years, I recomposed my features, reapplied my lipstick with a steady hand, and walked back into that glittering ballroom. My eyes, now armed with the terrible clarity of truth, found Preston instantly. He was no longer at our table. He was standing in the shadowed alcove by the terrace doors, his back partially to the room, deep in conversation with Natalie. Her crimson dress was a defiant flame in the darkness. As I watched, shielded by a towering arrangement of white orchids, she reached out and placed a hand on his tuxedo-clad arm. It wasn't a professional gesture. It was a touch of blatant ownership, of deep familiarity. She leaned in, close, her lips brushing his ear as she whispered something. He laughed, a low, intimate rumble that vibrated through the floor and straight into my heart, twisting the knife that was already there. And then he saw me. His laughter died. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm and took a deliberate step back. The private moment shattered. The public mask was back in place. He strode towards me, his expression hardening into one of cold accusation. "There you are. I was wondering where you'd gone," people were starting to ask. His tone was sharp, blaming, as if my brief absence was the true transgression. The audacity of his gaslighting was so profound, so shameless, it nearly buckled my knees. In that moment, staring into his cold, unapologetic eyes, the last vestiges of the love I had cherished for 17 years finally died, shriveling into the bitter ash of contempt. The grand ballroom lights dimmed to a dramatic low, and a single, piercingly bright spotlight swept across the room to illuminate the stage. The president of the Promise Gala for Youth, a formidable and respected woman named Mrs. Hayes, stepped up to the podium, her kind face beaming. "And now," she began, her voice resonating with warmth and genuine admiration, "it is my profound honor and pleasure to present this year's Philanthropist of the Year award. This award goes to a man whose dedication to the children of Philadelphia is truly unparalleled. A man of unimpeachable integrity, of immense vision, and of extraordinary heart. Please join me in a round of applause for Mr. Preston Crestwell." The room erupted in a tidal wave of applause. I rose to my feet with everyone else, my body moving on autopilot, a beautiful automaton with a smile carved into its face. The spotlight swung from the stage to our table, pinning us in its white-hot glare. Preston, basking in the adoration like the sun god, gave my arm a brief, condescending squeeze, a gesture for the cheap seats, before striding towards the stage with the unshakable confidence of a man who believes his own press. He accepted the heavy, flame-shaped crystal award from Mrs. Hayes, holding it aloft for the room to admire. The cameras flashed relentlessly, immortalizing the image of a philanthropist, a civic hero, a pillar of the community. A wave of profound nausea rolled through me, and I had to place a hand on the back of my chair to keep from swaying. A man of unimpeachable integrity. The words were a vile, twisted joke, a public farce being played out with me as the unwilling co-star. Preston leaned into the microphone, his face arranged in an expression of perfect, calculated humility. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. Thank you to the board, and thank you, all of you," he began, his voice's smooth, modulated purr that had charmed countless investors in boardrooms. "I am deeply, deeply humbled. But the real heroes are the people on the ground, doing the work every single day. When I look to the future, I think about the legacy we leave, the world we are building for the next generation. That world must be built on a foundation of absolute honesty, unwavering trust, and the strength of family." He paused for effect, his gaze sweeping the adoring crowd before landing with deliberate weight on me. And I must say, I could not have accomplished a fraction of this without the endless love and unwavering support of my beautiful wife Sophia. She is my rock, my moral compass, the very heart of our home and our family. The applause swelled again, louder this time, and every head in the room turned to me. I could feel their gazes on my skin, a heavy blanket of admiration, envy, and respect. They saw the proud and devoted wife, the graceful partner in a perfect marriage. They had no idea they were applauding a lie, honoring a fraud. My smile felt stretched to the breaking point, a rictus of silent, screaming agony. I wanted to tear down the chandeliers, to shatter the illusion. Instead, I simply inclined my head in a gracious nod, the perfect, supportive Mrs. Crestwell, playing my part until the bitter, bitter end. He held the crystal flame aloft one last time, a triumphant king surveying his loyal subjects, utterly blind to the fact that the very foundation he spoke of was about to disintegrate beneath his feet. The dramatic irony was a slow-acting poison, and I was being forced to drink every last drop. Following the crescendo of the award ceremony, the evening shifted into its final, most highly anticipated segment, the live auction. A slick, fast-talking auctioneer with a silver tongue and boundless energy bounded onto the stage, immediately whipping the wealthy crowd into a bidding frenzy. Extravagant prizes were unveiled one by one: a 10-day safari in Kenya, a vintage Aston Martin, a private cooking class with a world-renowned chef. The numbered paddles shot up across the ballroom as Philadelphia's most prominent families vied to outgive one another in a dazzling public display of their fortunes. Preston, still radiating an almost radioactive level of smugness from his award, was practically vibrating with self-satisfaction. He leaned towards me, his breath smelling of expensive wine, a self-important glint in his eyes. "I'm feeling particularly generous tonight," he whispered, his voice full of feigned spontaneity. "I think I'll donate something myself. A grand, last-minute gesture. It's good for the brand." With the flick of his wrist, he flagged down a young volunteer who was circulating with a stack of blank, glossy donation cards. Preston took one, along with the silver Mont Blanc pen he always carried. As he pulled the pen from his inner jacket pocket, a small cream-colored note card flittered out and landed on the pristine white tablecloth between us. I instantly recognized it as one of the decal-edged cards from the stationery set on my desk in the library, the ones I use for shopping lists and household reminders. He glanced at it for a split second, then back at the official donation card, a sly, almost lecherous smile touching the corners of his mouth. He began to scribble furiously on the glossy official card, his hand moving with a decisive flourish. "What is it you're donating?" I asked, my voice a hollow echo of my former self. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a film of my own life unfold from a great distance. "I'm feeling particularly generous tonight," he whispered, his voice full of feigned spontaneity. "I think I'll donate something myself. A grand, last-minute gesture. It's good for the brand." With a flick of a wrist, he flagged down a young volunteer who was circulating with a stack of blank, glossy donation cards. Preston took one, along with the silver Mont Blanc pen he always carried. As he pulled the pen from his inner jacket pocket, a small, cream-colored note card fluttered out and landed on the pristine white tablecloth between us. I instantly recognized it as one of the decal-edged cards from the stationery set on my desk in the library, the ones I use for shopping lists and household reminders. He glanced at it for a split second, then back at the official donation card, a sly, almost lecherous smile touching the corners of his mouth. He began to scribble furiously on the glossy, official card, his hand moving with a decisive flourish. "What is it you're donating?" I asked, my voice a hollow echo of my former self. I felt strangely detached, as if I were watching a film of my own life unfold from a great distance. "I'm feeling particularly generous tonight," he said, dismissively, not bothering to look up from his task. "A luxury weekend package, the works. It'll fetch a tidy sum for the children." He finished his note on the official card with a final, arrogant flick of the pen. Then, as if it were an afterthought, he jotted a few hurried words onto the cream-colored note card. My note card. Something about the private, reptilian amusement in his expression sent a fresh wave of cold dread through me. He folded the glossy donation card in half and handed it with a magnanimous air to the waiting volunteer, who immediately scurried off towards the stage. He then casually folded the cream-colored note card, the one I now assumed was some private joke or a note to himself, and tucked it neatly back into his inner pocket of his tuxedo. My eyes followed the volunteer as she weaved through the tables and handed the folded card to the auctioneer's assistant. I watched the assistant place it reverently on the top of the pile on the podium. Everything looked so ordinary, so perfectly normal. The string quartet began a soft, pleasant interlude as the auctioneer prepared for the final, most exciting items. Preston leaned back in his chair, tapping a self-satisfied rhythm on the table with his fingertips, the very picture of a confident, benevolent patriarch. He had made his grand gesture. He had set the stage for the final act in the grand drama of his perfect evening. He had absolutely no idea that he had just personally signed and delivered the death warrant for his own reputation. And I, his poor, oblivious wife, sat beside him in the silence, a helpless spectator to a catastrophe of his own making, a time bomb that was already ticking down to zero.
The auctioneer clapped his hands together, the sharp sound instantly silencing the room's low hum of conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, settle down, settle down. We have a few very special last-minute additions tonight, and believe me, you'll want to be ready for this one. This just came in from our philanthropist of the year himself, Mr. Preston Crestwell. A wave of polite, anticipatory applause washed through the ballroom. Preston, in his element, straightened his bow tie and gave a broad, magnanimous nod to the surrounding tables. He was soaking it in, ready for one final, glorious round of adulation. The auctioneer picked up the glossy white card from the top of his pile, his professional smile beaming. "Let's see what generous surprise Mr. Crestwell has in store for us," he boomed, his voice full of theatrical enthusiasm. He unfolded the card and held it up to the light. The smile on his face didn't just falter, it froze, then collapsed. A look of utter bewilderment, followed by a flicker of pure panic, crossed his features. He blinked rapidly, as if the words might change. He squinted at the card again, then shot a nervous, horrified glance directly at our table. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly hushed room. His well-oiled professional veneer was cracking under the strain of what he was reading. "Well," he stammered, attempting a weak recovery, This is certainly a one-of-a-kind package." He took a shaky breath, his showman's instincts warring with his common sense. In that fatal, split-second decision, the showman won. He decided to read it verbatim. "And next up," he announced, his voice now laced with a kind of stunned, incredulous theatricality, "a very generous and unique donation from our guest of honor. He's offering an all-expenses-paid, a weekend getaway with my wife and mistress." The final three words, amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system, detonated in the ballroom. They didn't just hang in the air, they sucked all the oxygen out of it. For a long, torturous, eternal second, there was a vacuum of absolute, deafening silence. The music had died, the chatter had vanished. You could have heard a diamond drop. It was as if a neutron bomb had gone off, vaporizing all sound and leaving only the stunned survivors. Then a collective horrified gasp swept through the room, a sound like the tide going out. My own breath caught in my throat, a painful, sharp sting. The blood in my veins turned to ice water. The N on his phone, the condo in Rittenhouse Square, the whispers in the powder room, the intimate touch in the alcove. It all slammed into place, not as a private suspicion, but as a ghastly, undeniable, publicly broadcast fact. I turned my head, the movement feeling sluggish and surreal, as if I were moving through molasses. I looked at Preston. The rich, confident color had completely drained from his face, leaving behind a sallow, pasty mask of absolute horror. His mouth hung open in a perfect, idiotic O, his eyes wide with the dawning, imbecilic comprehension of his colossal mistake. He had written his sick, private fantasy on the official card and pocketed his grocery list. My gaze, pulled by an invisible, vengeful string, then darted across the room. I found Natalie. She was a statue of pure panic, her face a blotchy, terrified canvas, her perfectly manicured hand clamped over her mouth as if to physically stifle a scream. In that single, mortifying, world-ending moment, his sordid affair was exposed to the entirety of Philadelphia's high society.
And I, his poor, composed, oblivious wife, was the unwilling centerpiece of his spectacular, self-inflicted humiliation. The stunned silence in the ballroom stretched on, thin and brittle, until it finally shattered into a cacophony of frantic, scandalized whispers. A woman at a nearby table let out a small, choked laugh of disbelief. Every single eye in that cavernous hall was locked on our table, on me. They were waiting for the inevitable, the tears, the screaming, the satisfyingly dramatic collapse of the wronged wife. Preston, seated beside me, was a statue of impotent dread, utterly paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his own stupidity. He finally managed to make a sound, a pathetic, stammering croak. "Sophia, that's not, it was a joke, a mistake." But I wasn't listening. The initial shockwave had passed, and in its wake, it left a strange and terrible calm. It was the calm at the eye of a hurricane. The humiliation had burned away every last trace of weakness, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. The emerald gown no longer felt like a costume, and the diamonds no longer felt like a collar. They felt like a warrior's regalia. Slowly, with the deliberate, unhurried grace of a queen, I placed my linen napkin on the table beside my untouched crab. Then, I stood up. The simple movement was imbued with so much weight that it silenced the entire room. The whispers died instantly. Every eye was on me, waiting. I turned my body, not to my pathetic husband, but to the auctioneer, who looked as if he was praying for a sinkhole to open up beneath the stage. I offered him a small, chillingly polite smile. "Please," I said, my voice perfectly clear and steady, carrying through the silent hall with an authority that needed no microphone. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for my husband's confusion." I let the word husband hang in the air for a moment, dripping with a newfound and terrible irony. It seems he has mistaken this esteemed platform for public service for a confessional. A few audible gasps rippled through the front tables. I then turned my head with glacial slowness to finally face Preston, the man I had loved, the man whose reputation I had so carefully guarded, looked utterly broken, small, pathetic, and shrunken in his expensive tuxedo. "As for the weekend getaway," I continued, my voice now dropping to a tone of pure, unadulterated ice, "I'm afraid my schedule has just opened up. Permanently." My gaze deliberately drifted across the room to where Natalie was attempting to melt into the damask wallpaper. "I'm sure the two of you will have a great deal to discuss. Perhaps you can finalize the details of the Singapore acquisition." My final gesture was for me alone. I raised my left hand, the flawless 12-carat diamond on my ring finger catching the single spotlight, scattering brilliant, cold fire across the room. For 17 years, it had been a symbol of his promise, his wealth, his possession of me. Now, it was nothing more than a shackle. With a calm, resolute movement, I slid the heavy wedding ring off my finger. It felt impossibly light, like shedding a great weight. I took the 2 steps to Preston's side of the table and with a steady hand placed the ring directly on his porcelain dinner plate. The diamond glittered malevolently beside the uneaten crab. "Perhaps," I announced, my voice ringing with a terrible finality for the entire room to hear, "this can be the starting bid for a new auction item." I paused, letting them all hang on my next words. "Let's call it the price of integrity." Without giving him another glance, without looking at his ashen, ruined face, I turned my back on him. I held my head high, my spine ramrod straight, and I walked away from the table. The crowd, a silent sea of shocked, mesmerized faces, parted from me as if I were Moses parting the Red Sea. I walked with a steady, unhurried rhythm, my heels clicking a defiant anthem on the polished marble floor. I walked out of the grand majestic ballroom, out of my marriage, and out of the gilded cage I had mistaken for a life. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I didn't shed a single tear. I simply left the smoldering ruins of Preston Cresswell behind for the entire world to witness. 6 months later, the soft morning sun of a Philadelphia spring streamed through the tall, mullioned windows of my new apartment in Old City, illuminating the desk motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. The apartment was a third of the size of the cavernous, sterile mansion I had once called home, but it was filled with more life and light than that house had ever known. It was mine. The walls were painted a warm ivory and lined with overflowing bookshelves, a testament to my rediscovered passion for art history. A large, half-finished canvas, an abstract landscape of bold, hopeful colors, rested on an easel in the corner, smelling faintly of turpentine and linseed oil. I was curled in a comfortable, worn armchair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming in my hands, a first edition E.H. Gombrich open in my lap. The phone on the table beside me buzzed with a message from an old college friend, one of the few who had reached out not with pity, but with the simple, "good for you." The message was a link to an article in the Philadelphia Business Journal. The headline was stark: Crestwell Corp in freefall as founder's reputational collapse triggers investor exodus. I clicked, a morbid curiosity I couldn't deny compelling me. The article laid out in excruciating financial detail Preston's spectacular and public demise. The Promise Gala incident, as it had been gleefully dubbed by the press, had become the stuff of local legend, a cautionary tale whispered at every cocktail party and boardroom meeting in the city. Major investors, repulsed by the sheer idiotic vulgarity of it all, had pulled their funding. Crestwell Corp's stock had plummeted. The board of directors, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal, had forced him to step down as CEO. His meticulously constructed empire, built on a fraudulent image of integrity, had crumbled under the weight of a few stupidly written words on a donation card. The article mentioned, almost as an aside, that he and Natalie were still together, living in a downsized home in the suburbs, mired in the social and financial fallout. They were pariahs, ostracized by the very society they had tried so hard to conquer. He had gotten his weekend getaway, it seemed, a permanent one, trapped in the wreckage with the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything. There was no flicker of pity in my heart, no lingering bitterness. There was only a quiet, profound, and deeply satisfying sense of cosmic justice. I closed the article, took a slow, deep, cleansing breath, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The burning shame and public humiliation that had threatened to consume me that night had been cauterized, leaving behind a resilient scar of strength I never knew I possessed. I looked around my sun-drenched apartment at the beautiful, authentic life I was building for myself, by myself. I was now consulting for a prominent art gallery, I was painting every day, and my weekends were filled with genuine laughter and coffee with real friends. I had traded the hollow title of Mrs. Preston Cresswell for the simple, powerful name of Sophia. The diamond ring I had left on that dinner plate had bought far more than a moment of public revenge. It had purchased my emancipation. I took another sip of my tea, a small, real smile finally reaching my eyes. The most perfect, most satisfying revenge wasn't the thunderous noise of his downfall, but the quiet, beautiful, and unshakable peace of my own new dawn. Justice, in its own time and in its own way, had been served.